The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair, a sterile cage where Ethan Walsh, 47, lay tethered to machines that beeped like a countdown. His chest ached, not just from the stent now propping open his heart, but from a wound no surgeon could touch. 3 days ago, somewhere on a desolate stretch of I-80 outside Lincoln, Nebraska, the world had gone gray. Ethan, a long-haul trucker with 24 years behind the wheel, had felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Stress, he'd told himself. Just the grind of endless roads and cheap diner coffee. But when the pain became a vice, crushing his breath, he'd pulled his rig to the shoulder, dialed 911 and collapsed against the steering wheel. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was a paramedic's voice. "We're losing him!" He woke to tubes snaking from his arms, a heart monitor's steady pulse, and a nurse's gentle warning, "You flatlined twice, Mr. Walsh. You're a miracle." Ethan didn't feel miraculous. His phone, resting on the bedside table, held a single message from his wife, Lauren, sent while he was unconscious. They'd been married 16 years, no kids, just a modest split level in Sioux City, Iowa, and a marriage that had grown quiet, like a radio losing its signal. The message included a screenshot of their joint bank account, balance $0.00. Below it, Lauren's words cut deeper than any heart attack. "I deserve this after all I've put up with for you. $63,927.41. His emergency fund, his truck maintenance savings, the nest egg he'd scraped together for a retirement he might never see. Gone. Ethan stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Rage should have burned through him, or grief, or something. Instead, a bone-deep exhaustion settled in, heavier than the IV in his vein. He typed a single thumbs-up emoji and hit send. No words, no fight, just a quiet surrender to a truth he'd ignored too long. When the doctor came by, a kind-eyed woman with a clipboard, she outlined his future. Rest, no stress, no driving for 8 weeks minimum. "Is someone coming to get you tomorrow?" she asked. Ethan forced a nod. "Yeah," he lied, his voice rough. He wasn't going home. That night, under the fluorescent hum of the hospital, Ethan made a call. His younger brother, Nate, a welder who lived across town in Sioux City, picked up on the second ring. "Ethan, you okay?" Nate's voice was thick with worry. They hadn't spoken in months, not out of bad blood, just the drift of lives pulling in different directions. "Need a favor," Ethan said, keeping it short. "A place to stay for a bit. And don't tell Lauren I'm out." A pause, then Nate's reply, steady as steel. "Done." "What's going on?" Ethan exhaled. "She knows I'm alive. She just doesn't know I'm done with her." The next day, discharged with a bottle of pills and a warning to take it easy, Ethan climbed into Nate's beat-up Chevy pickup. The hospital receded in the rear view, and with it, the life Ethan had known. Nate didn't push for details, just drove in silence, the kind of quiet that only brothers understand. Ethan's phone stayed off. He didn't want Lauren's texts, her excuses, her voice. The $63,927.41 wasn't just money. It was every mile he'd driven, every night he'd spent in a truck stop bunk, every dream he'd deferred for a marriage that had turned to ash. He'd met Lauren 17 years ago at a truck stop in Des Moines. She'd been stranded with a dead battery, her hazel eyes flashing with frustration as she fumbled with jumper cables. Ethan, 30 then, had stopped to help, his calloused hands making quick work of it. She'd called him her roadside knight, her smile warm enough to make him believe in second chances. They'd married 9 months later, not impulsive but hopeful, two people old enough to know life's edges, but young enough to think love could dull them. Lauren hadn't minded his long hauls at first. The money bought her the nice clothes, the spa weekends, the kitchen remodel she'd wanted. Ethan called every night from whatever state his rig was parked in, sharing stories of the road while her voice carried him home. But over time, the calls shortened. An hour became 10 minutes, then texts. Made it to Tulsa, all good. She stopped asking when he'd be back, started taking trips with friends he'd never met. He'd noticed her changing passwords, moving money to better accounts, but he'd trusted her. Marriage was trust, wasn't it? Now in Nate's spare bedroom, surrounded by mismatched furniture and the faint smell of welding flux, Ethan saw the signs he'd missed. Lauren's late-night phone checks, her sudden interest in investment opportunities, the way she'd dodged questions about her weekends away. And then there was Greg Parker, the neighbor who'd always been too friendly, always around when Ethan was gone. Ethan hadn't suspected an affair, not because he was naive, but because he'd wanted to believe in the woman who'd once looked at him like he was enough. Nate set a plate of scrambled eggs on the nightstand. "You gotta eat, man," he said, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Nate, 42, was twice divorced, his own heart scarred by women who'd left him for better options. He knew betrayal's sting. "She really took everything?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Ethan nodded, pushing the eggs around with a fork. "Every cent." "While I was dying." Nate's face darkened. "What's the play here, Ethan? You gonna let her walk?" Ethan set the plate down, his eyes hard. "Not a chance. But I need time, and I need to know what else she's hiding." That afternoon, a text came from their neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, a nosy retiree who'd always liked Ethan. "Haven't seen you in days. You okay? Lauren's got some guy over, thought you should know." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. He didn't reply, but the words burned. Some guy. Greg, no doubt. He leaned back, the hospital's warning echoing. No stress, no strain. But stress wasn't optional now. It was fuel. Ethan opened his laptop, logging into a small business account Lauren didn't know about, one he'd set up for his side gigs hauling specialty freight. The balance was modest. $8,000, 0 cents. But it was his, untouched. Then he called Nate's daughter, Sophie, a 22-year-old law student interning at a local firm. "Need your brain, kid," he said when she answered. "Can you dig into something for me?" Sophie's voice was bright, eager. "Uncle Ethan, you're out of the hospital." "Yeah, whatever you need." He explained the bank account, the text, the neighbor's message. "Find out what she's doing with the money," he said. "And if Greg's involved." Sophie didn't hesitate. On it. As night fell, Ethan sat on Nate's porch, the Iowa sky a canvas of stars. His chest didn't hurt, not physically, but the weight of Lauren's betrayal pressed down, a quiet agony. He wasn't angry yet, not fully. What he felt was clarity, sharp and cold. Lauren hadn't just stolen his money. She'd stolen his trust, his home, his past. But she'd also given him something, a reason to fight. He thought of the house, refinanced in his name alone last year, when Lauren had been too busy to sign. He thought of the medical power of attorney he'd set up after a buddy's health scare, naming Nate as his proxy, not Lauren. Small decisions, made without malice, now loomed like lifelines. His phone buzzed. Another text from Lauren. "Where are you? Your rig's not at the depot. We need to talk." Ethan stared at the words, her desperation seeping through the screen. He didn't reply, let her wonder, let her sweat. He wasn't the man she'd left for dead in that hospital bed. That Ethan was gone, buried under the weight of her greed. The man sitting here under the stars was something new. Wounded, yes, but waking up. And he was ready to take back what was his. Ethan Walsh sat at Nate's kitchen table, the morning light slicing through the blinds, casting bars across the legal papers spread before him. His heart, still fragile from the stent, beat steady but heavy, each thump a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. Not just his life, but his dignity, his future. The $63,927.41 Lauren had stolen wasn't just money. It was his years of sacrifice. The endless miles driven through blizzards and breakdowns, the dreams he'd tucked away for a day that might never come. But Ethan wasn't broken, not yet. In Nate's cramped Sioux City home, surrounded by the quiet loyalty of family, he was forging a plan to take it all back. Nate slid a mug of black coffee across the table, his welder's hands rough but careful. "You sure you're up for this, Ethan?" he asked, his voice low, eyes searching his brother's face. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "She didn't just rob me, Nate. She did it while I was dying. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." Nate leaned back, his own scars from betrayal etched in the lines around his eyes. "Then we fight. But you're not doing it alone. Ethan's gaze flicked to the papers. A copy of the house refinancing agreement, signed solely in his name last year, when Lauren had been too swamped to show up. Another document, a medical power of attorney naming Nate as his proxy, not Lauren, drafted after her friend's health crisis had spooked him. Small practical choices, made without foresight, now stood as his armor. Sophie, Nate's 22-year-old daughter, burst through the door, her law school backpack slung over one shoulder. "Got something," she said, her voice electric as she dropped a folder onto the table. Sophie's internship at a Sioux City credit union had given her access to financial records most wouldn't think to check. Lauren's been funneling money into a secret account for 18 months. Regular deposits always under $10,000, 0 cents to avoid federal reporting. And guess who's an authorized user? Ethan's stomach churned. "Greg Parker," he said, the neighbor's name tasting like bile. Sophie nodded, her eyes fierce. "They're not just sneaking around, Uncle Ethan. They're planning to run." Ethan opened the folder, scanning bank statements that laid bare Lauren's betrayal, deposits timed to his longest hauls, weeks when he was in California or Texas, too tired to notice her silence. A hotel charge in Omaha, booked under Greg's name while Ethan was hauling freight in Nevada, and a real estate listing, forwarded by Sophie from a public database. Greg's house, 2 doors down, was for sale. "He's liquidating," Sophie said, "probably to split the cash with Lauren and disappear." Ethan's hands clenched, the papers crinkling. He thought of Lauren's text from the hospital, her cold justification, "I deserve this." He thought of the workers at his trucking company, men and women with families, who'd sent him get-well cards while his own wife had robbed him blind. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a violation of everything he'd worked for. Nate clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We need a lawyer, someone who'll make them bleed." Sophie grinned, pulling out her phone. "Already on it. My professor knows Hannah Klein, best divorce attorney in Iowa. She eats cases like this for breakfast." By noon, Ethan was in Hannah's downtown office, a no-nonsense space with views of the Missouri River. Hannah, 50, with sharp eyes and a handshake like iron, listened as Ethan recounted the hospital, the theft, the secret account. When he showed her Sophie's findings, her lips curled into a predator's smile. "Lauren's mistake was thinking you'd roll over," she said, tapping the refinancing agreement. "This house is yours, legally, and the medical power of attorney, that proves you didn't trust her with your life, let alone your money. We've got her on financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Serious stuff in Iowa." Ethan's throat tightened. "What about the money?" Hannah leaned forward. "Joint account or not, withdrawing it while you were incapacitated, with evidence of a hidden account and an affair, that's fraud territory. We'll freeze her assets, drag Greg into it, and make sure they can't run." Ethan nodded, but his mind was on the workers, the neighbors, the life he'd built in Sioux City. "I don't want revenge," he said, his voice low. "I want what's mine, and I want her to know she can't do this to anyone else." Hannah's eyes softened, just for a moment. "Then let's make it hurt where it counts." Her wallet and her pride. Over the next week, Ethan became a ghost in his own life. He stayed at Nate's, ignoring Lauren's increasingly frantic texts. "Where are you? We can fix this. Don't do something stupid." He didn't reply, letting Hannah handle all communication. Sophie kept digging, uncovering a paper trail that grew uglier by the day. Cash withdrawals, wire transfers to Greg, even a lease agreement for an apartment in Minneapolis, signed by both. Nate, meanwhile, drove Ethan to the bank's main branch, where he met with a fraud specialist. Showing the hospital records and Lauren's text, Ethan filed a formal complaint. The specialist, a woman with kind but weary eyes, promised to escalate it. "If she acted while you were unconscious, Mr. Walsh, that's not just unethical, it's potentially criminal." Then came the break Ethan hadn't expected. Late one night, parked outside his own house under the cover of a moonless sky, he saw Lauren and Greg arguing in the driveway, their voices carried, sharp and desperate. "You said we'd be gone by now," Lauren hissed. Greg's reply was low, but Ethan caught the edge. "You're the one who screwed this up." Ethan's phone was in his hand, recording before he could think. 30 seconds of raw, unfiltered truth, proof of their collusion, their affair, their plan to flee. He sent the video to Hannah with a single word: "Gotcha." The emergency hearing came 2 weeks later, in a Sioux City courthouse that smelled of old wood and tension. Ethan, in a borrowed suit from Nate, sat beside Hannah, his heart pounding but his resolve ironclad. Lauren sat across the room, flanked by her attorney, Patricia Voss, a sharp-dressed shark known for tearing through opponents. But Judge Clara Morton, a white-haired woman with a reputation for zero tolerance, wasn't here for theatrics. Hannah presented the case with surgical precision, hospital records proving Ethan's incapacity, the bank screenshot, Sophie's financial findings, and the damning video. Mrs. Walsh exploited her husband's near death for personal gain, Hannah said, her voice cutting through the room. She and Mr. Parker planned to abscond with his life savings, leaving him with nothing. Patricia Voss countered, her tones slick. "Your Honor, this is a joint account. My client had every right to access it. Mr. Walsh's absence post-hospitalization suggests desertion, not victimhood." But Judge Morton's eyes were on the video, looping silently on a courtroom screen, Lauren and Greg caught in their own web. "Ms. Voss," the judge said, her voice like steel, "are you aware your client swore under oath she had no relationship with Mr. Parker?" Voss faltered and Lauren's face went ashen. "Your Honor, the relationship is irrelevant." "It's relevant when it's tied to financial fraud," Morton snapped. She turned to Ethan, her gaze softening. "Mr. Walsh, you were unconscious when this withdrawal occurred?" Ethan nodded, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Yes, ma'am." "I woke up to nothing." The room held its breath as Morton delivered her ruling. "I'm ordering all assets of Lauren Walsh and Gregory Parker frozen pending a full divorce proceeding. Neither may leave Woodbury County without court approval. Given Mr. Walsh's medical vulnerability and the evidence of exploitation, I'm granting him temporary exclusive use of the marital home." Lauren gasped, a choked sob escaping, but Ethan felt no satisfaction. He saw the workers in his mind, men and women who'd trusted him, who'd face their own betrayals someday. He saw Nate, Sophie, the family who'd carried him when he couldn't stand. Tears pricked his eyes, not for Lauren's fall, but for the weight of what he'd survived. As they left the courtroom, Lauren tried to approach, her eyes wild with fear. "Ethan, please, we can talk." Voss yanked her back, but not before Ethan met her gaze, his voice low and final. "You made your choice." Outside, Hannah clapped his shoulder. "This is just round one. She's down, but she's not out." Ethan nodded, the video still burning in his mind. Lauren's desperation, Greg's cowardice. Greg, Hannah later confirmed, had skipped town that night, leaving Lauren to face the wreckage alone. Ethan didn't care. His fight wasn't with Greg, it was with the woman who'd looked at his deathbed and saw a paycheck. Back at Nate's, Sophie hugged him, her voice thick. "You did it, Uncle Ethan." Nate raised a beer, his grin wide. "To kicking ass." But Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere, on the house he'd soon reclaim, the money he'd fight for, the life he'd rebuild. Lauren had tried to bury him, but she'd only unearthed a man ready to rise. The war was far from over, and Ethan Walsh was just getting started. Ethan Walsh stood in the Sioux City courthouse parking lot, the November wind biting through his borrowed suit. The ink on Judge Morton's ruling was barely dry. Lauren's assets frozen, Greg Parker a fugitive shadow, the house Ethan had poured his life into now legally his. But victory felt hollow. His heart, still tethered to a stent, thudded with a mix of relief and grief. He'd won the battle, but the war had cost him something deeper: trust, love, the man he'd been before Lauren's betrayal. Nate clapped his shoulder, his voice rough with pride. "You did it, brother. You took her down." Ethan managed to nod, but his eyes were on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered over the Missouri River. This wasn't the end. It was a reckoning, and Ethan was only beginning to understand what he'd fight for next. Inside Nate's truck, Sophie scrolled through her phone, her law student's mind already racing. "Uncle Ethan, Hannah says the divorce filing is next. Lauren's lawyer is scrambling. Greg bailing screwed her whole strategy." Ethan stared out the window. The video of Lauren and Greg arguing in this very lot burned into his memory. Their desperation, their lies, had unraveled them, but Ethan felt no joy. He thought of the hospital bed, the tubes, the moment he'd woken to find his life savings gone. He thought of the workers at his trucking company, their get-well cards a lifeline when his own wife had left him for dead. "She didn't just take my money," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. "She took my faith in people." Sophie's eyes softened and Nate gripped the wheel tighter. "Then we rebuild it," Nate said. "Starting now." The divorce proceedings moved like a freight train. Hannah Klein, relentless as a winter storm, built a case that left Lauren's attorney, Patricia Voss, grasping at straws. The evidence was a guillotine: hospital records proving Ethan's incapacity, bank statements exposing Lauren's secret account, the video tying her to Greg's scheme. Voss tried to spin Ethan as the villain, claiming he'd abandoned Lauren by vanishing after the hospital. But Hannah's cross-examination was brutal, her questions slicing through Voss's lies like a blade. "Did your client believe her husband was abandoning her while he was unconscious, fighting for his life?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Lauren, pale and silent in the witness box, couldn't meet Ethan's eyes. Judge Morton, her patience worn thin, ruled decisively. Ethan was awarded the house, his truck, and 80% of the joint savings, $51,141.93, after Lauren paid his legal fees. Lauren got her car and a meager 20%, a fraction of the fortune she'd tried to steal. Lauren's fall was swift and public. Sioux City was a small enough town that whispers spread fast. Neighbors gossiped about her affair, her greed, the way she'd left Ethan to die while she plotted with Greg. Greg, Hannah later confirmed, had fled to Minneapolis, his house sale blocked by the court's injunction. Lauren, abandoned by her accomplice, had no choice but to comply. She moved out of the house within days, her belongings packed into a U-Haul under the watchful eye of Mrs. Callahan, who reported every detail to Ethan. "She looked like a ghost," the old woman texted. "No fight left in her." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to see Lauren's defeat to feel its weight. 3 months later, Ethan stood in the driveway of his house, keys in hand. The split level, once a symbol of his and Lauren's shared dreams, now felt like a stranger's. He walked through the empty rooms, the echoes of their life together haunting every corner. The kitchen where Lauren had once danced to old country tunes. The bedroom where they'd whispered about a future that never came. In the hall, he found a single photo tucked behind a shelf. A snapshot from their wedding, Lauren's smile bright, Ethan's eyes full of hope. He stared at it, his chest tight, not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it stole his breath. He'd loved her once, truly, and she'd turned that love into a weapon. Tears fell, silent and unashamed, as he set the photo down. Some things you mourn, not because they're gone, but because they were never what you believed. Ethan sold the house that spring, the sale closing at $280,000, 0 cents. He didn't need the space, the memories, the ghosts. With the money, he bought a modest bungalow a mile from Nate's place, a cozy 2-bedroom with a porch where he could watch the Iowa sunsets. The rest he split half into a college fund for Sophie, whose sharp mind and fierce heart had saved him, and half into a retirement account for the day he'd finally rest. His heart couldn't handle long hauls anymore, so he took a job as a dispatcher at his trucking company, a desk role that kept him home every night. The work was steady, the stress manageable, and the rhythm of it grounded him. He'd traded the open road for roots, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Lauren, he heard through the Sioux City grapevine, had moved to Minneapolis, chasing a fresh start. A mutual friend mentioned she'd started a small event planning business, scraping by on her own. One night, Nate showed Ethan a text from a cousin. Lauren had called, asking about Ethan, wondering if he'd ever forgive her. "She's learning," Nate said, his tone neutral. "Betrayal's a hard teacher." Ethan shrugged, his heart no longer heavy with her name. "She didn't break me," he said. "She set me free." And he meant it. Lauren's betrayal, as cruel as it was, had forced him to see himself clearly, a man of grit, loyalty, and quiet strength. She'd tried to bury him, but she'd only unearthed his will to live. Sophie, now in her final year of law school, became Ethan's pride. He'd slip her extra cash for textbooks, grinning when she protested. "You're gonna be a hell of a lawyer," he'd say, and she'd blush, her ambition a mirror of his own resilience. Nate, too, was a constant: Friday night beers, bad action movies, and a brotherhood that no betrayal could shake. One evening, as they sat on Ethan's porch, the sky ablaze with orange and pink, Nate raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he said. Ethan clinked his bottle, his eyes on the stars. "To surviving," he added, his voice thick with meaning. The lessons were hard-won, carved into Ethan's soul like tire tracks on a long road. Lauren's actions were hers alone, he couldn't control them. But he could control his response. Nate and Sophie had been his lifeline, their love a reminder that family endures when all else fails. The house refinancing, the medical power of attorney, small acts of foresight had been his shield, proof that preparation could outlast betrayal. And the life he'd built now, simple but whole, was a testament to the truth. Pain could break you, or it could forge you into something stronger. As Ethan locked up his bungalow one night, a moving box caught his eye in the garage. Inside was the wedding album, untouched since the house sale. He flipped it open, the photos a time capsule of a life that no longer fit. Lauren's smile, once his world, now felt like a stranger's. He didn't throw it away. Instead, he closed the album and set it on a shelf, a quiet nod to the man he'd been. The heart attack had nearly killed him, the betrayal had nearly broken him, but Ethan Walsh was still here, standing tall, his heart beating steady. The road ahead was his, and he'd drive it on his own terms, with a family that loved him, a purpose that sustained him, and a strength that no one could steal again.